What did you see?
Iceberg, dead ahead, sir.
Iceberg, dead ahead, sir.
Hard to starboard.
Hard to starboard, sir.
Full astern, both.
Full starboard, sir.
Close watertight doors.
Close watertight doors, sir.
Hard to starboard it is, sir.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Let's imagine if we could go back in time and lift the mass of metal that looks like a drowned loaf of brown bread back to the surface. If we could reverse the effects of rust and ruin and restore Titanic to the surface, good as new, plus the benefit of hindsight. In this scenario, our thoughts aren't paralyzed around the hubris that surely the ship can't sink, or the terror about whether it can. With that out of the way, are we able to engineer a better outcome? Seriously. Imagine you were given access to a time machine and your mission, if you chose to accept it, was to go back in time to the night Titanic sank and save as many lives as possible on Titanic. But these are the rules. The same ship still has to sail when and where it did, with all the same people on board. The ship also has to hit the iceberg. Since you can't go back further than the night of, you can't change many of the key points, such as the engineering, or the type of rivets used, or how many lifeboats there were, or making sure the captain got some of the last telegrams warning of icebergs ahead. Also, just to be clear, you can't change the speed the ship was going at the time the crew spotted the iceberg that sank the Titanic. So these are the rules. What would you do? How many lives could you save? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. I'm going to be following up this analysis with a look at somebody who is totally obsessed with the Titanic and who really, I think she saved for 30 years in order to go down to the wreck. We'll be talking about her next, so look out for that. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, what you're about to experience, at least you will if I've done my job, is this idea of coming out under the shadow of a certain kind of psychology, a psychology of grandiosity, a psychology of hubris, a psychology of self-pity. And how do you do that? Well, by thinking properly, thinking clearly in an emergency. Granted, we're cheating. Granted, we know the final result before the game starts. But these suggestions show just how simply and easily a strong psychology, just that, could arguably have prevented a single loss of life. You could have saved literally everybody. And so this is the short version to that story. Well, first of all, did you know we actually have historical photographs of the bad boy that sank the Unsinkable? Here it is. And now from another angle. And this is a third version of the iceberg. As you can see certainly from the castle poking out above the water, it's not small. And here's the Titanic. One of the problems we faced with aboard the Titanic on that fateful night is firstly, how to convince the captain we're from the future, and secondly, that we know what we're talking about. In any event, the single most important strategy that alone could likely save literally everyone on board Titanic, and in fact even prevent the ship from sinking, happens at the very last moment. If you just do one thing differently, one small thing. The trick would be how to convince one of the most experienced sea captains on Earth at the time to do the unthinkable in order to prevent the unsinkable from sinking. Because he's going to be thinking, even if we hit this iceberg, we won't sink. So how to convince him firstly that hitting the iceberg, even a glancing blow, especially a glancing blow, will sink it. And secondly, that the better way to hit it, because it can't be avoided, is to hit it head on.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Okay, well, let's assume he doesn't say that. He doesn't assume we're nutcases, doesn't throw us in the brig. How are we going to convince him that the scheme is possibly going to work? Answer: engineering. The problem with both the captain and the crew of the Titanic was that they didn't realize the ship was designed. It was engineered with reinforcements specifically so that it should survive a direct hit with an iceberg. So the part you want the ship to take the full brunt from an impact with an iceberg is the bow, not the side. So the bottom line is don't deviate, hit the berg head on.
I think if William Murdoch had ploughed directly into the iceberg, Titanic would have survived. The main impact would have been taken by her collision bulkhead, this steel wall, right up to the weather deck, the highest deck within the vessel.
And that's an excerpt from the free documentary channel.
Here's the position. Water in the forepeak. Numbers 1 and 2 hose, the mail room and boiler rooms 6 and 5. That means a gash 300 foot long from there to there, below the waterline. Do you agree?
Yes. Well?
The pumps are keeping the water down in this boiler room, but the first 5 compartments are flooding.
Well, what's the answer?
She's going to sink, Captain.
But she can't sink. She's unsinkable.
She can't float. Look, she could float with any 3 of her first 5 watertight compartments flooded. She could even float with 4 of them gone. But she can't float with all 5 full up.
Yes, but
These water...
So even if the Titanic sustained catastrophic damage to the bow, losing the first compartment, the second compartment, the third, even the fourth, that is a heck of a lot of wreckage, it would still not have sunk. Think of it as a long hot knife, a wedge cutting through butter. That sharp leading edge was Titanic's strongest point. The area behind it running all along the hull was its weakest. Now, assuming the captain doesn't freak out and say,
"Will be destroyed for sure. This is madness."
You might also want to fish out these photographs supporting evidence of large ships that did survive direct hits, bow first into large icebergs, and then went on to float another day. Many other days they were repaired and then they were continued service. Just don't show him this photo of a Canadian cruise ship that sank off Antarctica just 15 years ago. Go straight for the iceberg, take it on head on, do that, and the Titanic would have been unsinkable in that situation. Now, let's say for the sake of argument, the captain ignored the order.
Any chance he ignored the order?
Ignored the order?
Any chance he forgot about it?
No.
Any chance he left your office and said, "The old man is wrong"?
And let's say he did say that and he did ignore the order and he hits the iceberg just the way it happened in history. What then? Complete disaster? Well, now things are going to get scrappy. What we need to do now is drop the anchor immediately. So the moment Titanic hits the iceberg, drop the anchor. Why? Well, what if you turn Titanic's doomsday into your life raft? I mean, that's almost an apartment block of ice. That's a big iceberg. And it's big enough, perhaps good enough for holding 100, maybe 200, even more people. Even if you could save just 1 life or 2, wouldn't it be worth it? It would be for the person whose life was saved. And so there's a lot more to this argument than meets the eye. Of course, the iceberg would be slippery and treacherous. And in the original history, Titanic stopped about a mile from its nemesis. A long way to row there and to row back, but not out of the realm of possibility for the rescue boats to ferry survivors if they got their show on the road as soon as possible. Also, they could throw towels and linen onto the sides of the berg to make it softer and less slippery. Anyway, that is the short version of our story. There's also a longer version. And then there's also the very long version. In the very long version, which we can go into more detail if you like, we can try to remember the origin story of the iceberg. How are icebergs engineered? And what exactly would have happened if and when iceberg did hit this monstrosity head on? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.